This is episode 52 with Ryan Robinson.
Welcome to the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, the show that empowers you to become the hero of your life's journey. With your host, Brian Tier.
Hey guys and girls, welcome back to another episode of the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, episode 52, and I'm really excited to be speaking to a good buddy of mine, Ryan Robinson. Now, Ryan and I actually were in contact for about 6 months before we even recorded this interview, and the interview itself was from a few months ago, but still so much gold in this one. If you haven't heard of Ryan, he's an entrepreneur, content marketer, and freelancer who teaches thousands of people how to validate and launch a profitable side business while still working their full-time job. After creating a promising side business early in his own career, Ryan's boss denied him the opportunity to work on both, and he took that as a sign to quit and focus full-time on his own biz. However, that premature decision led to Ryan having to move back home with his parents. From there, he took another regular job while he worked on new side projects, and recently managed to go on his own full-time again, but this time with the financial means necessary to make it all work out. Ryan now teaches others how to do the same so that we can avoid the failures he experienced when trying to quit our jobs and become self-employed. Now, in this episode, you're going to learn lessons learned in quitting a job too soon and what to do first, how to handle moving back in with your parents, the number one reason for having a side project, Ryan's rule for when it's time to quit your job for your side gig, how to choose what to start a side gig about, why we shouldn't try find or follow our passion and what to do instead, and how to find time to work on your side gig while still being employed. As always, you can get the links and resources we mentioned in this awesome episode at briantier.com/052. But for now, let's go hang out with Ryan. Welcome back, everyone, and a big welcome to today's guest. I'm super excited to be speaking to Ryan Robinson. Ryan, welcome to the Quarter Life Comeback.
Thank you for having me. I'm pumped to be here.
Yeah, normally I kind of start and lead in with how I met the people that I'm speaking to. And with you, I can't actually... full authenticity. I can't actually remember how we originally connected. I think it might have been through Caroline and an article that she had written. And then we've interacted on Twitter and stuff. And this interview's been a long time in the making. But for people who aren't familiar with what you're all about and the work that you do, why don't you share a bit of that and your own quarter life story?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was actually digging through my emails trying to figure out how exactly we first met originally too. And it was through Caroline. I think it was right when you interviewed her for the podcast. She had just guest posted on my blog, and I think she mentioned that story in the show. And so I saw a link come in from you, and that was how I originally found you there. But yeah, so I'm Ryan Robinson. My website is ryrob.com, and that's sort of been my home for the past couple of years now, sharing all of my ups and downs, the biggest failures, the biggest lessons, and the occasional success. And right now, this year, back in July, I quit my full-time job, this time on my own terms. I've had a lot of experience quitting jobs. And this time I was able to sort of successfully launch into my own self-employed career where I was actually earning more than what I made at my full-time job previously. And now I'm basically a freelance content marketer. And I work with companies like LinkedIn, Creative Live, which is an online education company. And so I'm kind of growing from there. And that's sort of my baseline, what's paying the bills right now. And I have my own line of online courses, which is sort of the future of my business.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be to kind of get into that process of when you quit your job now, but also the first time. So let's take it back even further then, and what you would kind of define as your quarter life crisis. And I think it involved quitting a job too soon as well. So why don't you get into that for us?
Oh yeah, this is one of my favorite stories. Happens to also be my most painful story, but I guess that's what makes it a good story. And so taking you back to, gosh, this was 2012, the year I graduated from college. I lived down in Orange County, Newport Beach, actually, and I had gone to Chapman University. And now, fast forward to graduating, I was living with a couple of my best friends, and I ended up starting a business with one of my best friends. And the business was called Case Escape. We made custom phone cases. So you could come to our website, you could upload a picture, an image, and we would print it onto a case and ship it to you within a week. And so that was sort of our original business model. We had an Etsy store where we were selling sort of just stock designs, more geared towards women typically. And we had just started marketing a new product, which was sort of a start your own business kit, where we would sell the actual printer that we use to make the phone cases. And so now we had this sort of B2B type of business model with Case Escape, where we were starting to try and figure out how the hell we were going to sell this, $5,000-ish package to help people start their own phone case business. And we were doing this, both my partner and myself, we were doing this on the side of our full-time jobs, first jobs out of college. And we were working a ton. We were working like 50 hours, 60 hours per week at our day jobs, and then trying to squeeze in time to actually work and grow our business around that. And so sort of my first real learning experience with trying to grow a side business was figuring out that I suck at working on projects after I'm already drained from a full day of work. Mm-hmm. And so that was my first big wake-up call in terms of lifestyle changes that I needed to make. And that launched me on this crusade that I'm still on, where I now get up at about 4:30 in the morning, still at least 3 days a week. Back then, I was doing it every day. It was much easier when I was single, to be honest. And so we were starting to get some traction with this business, right? And where the real crisis comes in, where it gets really fun, was when my boss at the time learned about my side business. Well, I told him about it. I needed some schedule flexibility, basically, in order to do a trade show with Case Escape. That could have been huge. It could have helped us launch this B2B facet of our business, basically. And so I came to my boss. I was like, hey, for the next month, there's this trade show going on. Would you mind giving me a little bit of flexibility? I can stagger my hours, come in a few hours early in order to leave in the afternoon and go work at this trade show. And at first he was like really receptive to it. He's like, yeah, that sounds great. Let me just confirm with my partner. Need to make sure we're both on the same page. And so I come in the next day and he has a totally different look on his face. And basically his response is, all right, so I talked to my partner and you've been doing a great job here at work. We would love to continue having you, but we can't afford to have our employees working on other businesses. And even though my company wasn't competing whatsoever, totally different space, my job was in sort of a fashion-related industry, and then my business was phone cases. So totally different, but basically he gave me the ultimatum between needing to either leave my business or leave his company. And so I chose to leave his company and launched full-time into Case Escape. And, the rest is history. We ended up selling our first little business B2B kits and doing pretty well. But my next hard lesson was that it takes a lot of cash flow revenue coming into the business in order to pay yourself out even a livable wage. Mm-hmm. And so at the time, our business was making a few $1,000s a month when I quit my job. And looking at just that few $1,000s, sure, that's got to be enough to give myself a livable wage. But, factoring in the fact that I was splitting revenue 50-50 with my partner, that diluted it a lot. And then on top of that, we had a lot of expenses. And so we were basically, the company was not even breaking even let alone being able to pay ourselves out. And so about 3 months after quitting my job, I had this sort of holy shit moment where, the numbers in my checking and savings account were just spiraling downhill really fast. And, at the time I didn't really have like a lot of money. I had just graduated college. It wasn't a very well planned decision to quit my job, basically. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, my quarter life crisis came at about, I think I was 22. Yeah, it came at 22. I ended up moving home and living with my parents for about 6 months. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that was a really tough life lesson there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, looking back, there's so much I can get into there, but let's start with this one. So, looking back now, what would you tell that sort of 22-year-old Ryan to do when your boss gave you that ultimatum?
Oh man. Well, looking back now, I love where I am currently. So I wouldn't want to change any of those lessons because I wouldn't have learned them in the same way. But my advice to someone else who wants to, maybe avoid this type of painful learning experience would be to really figure out where your boss stands, where your company policy is, if you can, before you even start that conversation. So I sort of went into it blind, like, yeah, this is my plan. This is what I'm going to do. Why wouldn't he support me in this? If it was just him personally, he probably would have supported me in it. But there are other factors that are so far beyond your control. He could have partners, he could have advisors, other employees could be complaining about the fact that, you have this side project outside of work that's making you tired or taking a lot of your attention. And so there's no replacement for knowing what your company policy is, or at least talking to maybe someone else who has a side project and getting their take on where the company stands on the policies.
Okay, cool. Gotcha. Yeah, I agree. Like, I also tell people that quitting my job without really a plan B was not a great decision. But it's all led to where I am now. So I still wouldn't change that in the long run. What was it like moving back in with your parents? And like, maybe do you have some tips for people that are facing that situation?
Yeah, to be honest, it was bittersweet. So I do love my family, but I'm from a super small town in the middle of nowhere, Central California. It's called Hanford, population about 50,000 now, but I think there are about 3 times as many cows as there are people. And so I had gone to college down south in Orange County, and that was where my network was. That was where all my friends still lived. And then even when I went to high school, the high school that I went to was about 45 minutes outside of Hanford because it was such a small town. And so I didn't have a lot of friends around me when I was in Hanford, but it gave me a good chance to actually reconnect and rebuild a lot of really strong relationships with my cousins that are my age. I do have a huge family, about 100 people were at our last Thanksgiving. But it was definitely bittersweet, right? Because I got home and, my mom in particular is super sweet and she wants to be really involved in my life and what's going on, day-to-day basis. I'm still working on Case Escape at the time. Our hypothesis, my partner and I, was basically that he moved home at the same time I did, and quit his job. So he went back to Philadelphia on the East Coast. And our hypothesis was that, with much lower expenses, we could focus on keeping money in the business, growing it, seeing where it can take us. And so I sort of gave myself this 6-month timeline. But yeah, in terms of the day-to-day, it was kind of difficult because my mom was, wants to be part of my life now that I'm home. But I had just spent basically 5 years of super independence. I still had a great relationship with my parents, but I wasn't seeing them every day. I wasn't having, breakfast with them, dinner, seeing them every night, even on the weekends. And so that lifestyle change led me to having to set some ground rules with them and have sort of a, like a pretty frank conversation around like, hey, I'm going to be getting up without you needing to wake me up. Sort of just changing the status quo of like, back in high school, things were way different. Mm-hmm. And now I'm an adult, so I need to be treated a little bit differently as well. And that's kind of hard when you're coming, in some ways crawling back from what could feel like a failure at the time.
Yeah. Yes. Cool. So just setting some boundaries and making sure everyone's on the same page. So as I mentioned earlier, and I've mentioned it on a couple of other episodes, that I tell people now that if they can avoid it, don't just quit your job without a plan B. But it's something that I've never actually tackled on the show in terms of the how, which is why I'm really excited to have you on based on your experience too. So the big topic that we are going to discuss today is how to start that side gig while you're still fully employed at a sort of a 9-to-5. So could you maybe tell us why you're so passionate about side gigs and how you've experienced them?
Oh yeah, totally. If you I would say actually that the number one reason why I recommend people having a side project, regardless of how serious you take it, is that it creates opportunities for you. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to have the ambition of being fully self-employed one day, but if you have some sort of side project you're working on, you're always going to be learning. And you can take the lessons you learn, the strategies, the tools you pick up, and you can apply that to doing better at your job. And so one of the biggest reasons why I'm such a huge advocate of side projects is that my side projects have opened tons of doors for me. They were the reason that I actually got the last full-time job I had. And if I hadn't gotten that full-time job at Creative Live, I wouldn't be where I am now. And so when I look back at sort of my progression, having a blog where I'm frequently writing about my ups and downs in the world of business and working on my own online courses and sort of exploring different little projects on my own time has sort of led me to the different jobs and career opportunities that have created where I am now. And so, the real reason or the real rule that I give myself when I'm considering quitting my day job to pursue a side project full time is that I need to be making at least 75% of my salaried income from a side business. And so my line of thinking with this is that, well, if I'm earning at least 75% of what my day job already pays me, I'm willing to bet that I can up that and make the difference with that 25% once I unlock much more time for myself. But, looking back at my experience with Case Escape, I don't want to risk that insane gap where I'm basically earning next to nothing from my business and hoping that it's going to turn a profit quickly. So I want that much more sure thing now.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that the side projects kind of leads to big opportunities. Before the interview, we were speaking about that very thing in my case as well. So it's really cool that you mentioned that. And also like people, the big kind of buzz phrase these days is like, how do I find my passion? And I think just starting a blog, even if you're not actually creating a product, but like where you're getting your thoughts and what interests you out on, digital paper, or even like a podcast like this, can go a long way in figuring out what it is that you are interested in. So yeah, really cool that you mentioned that. I think the big thing then is people are like, okay, cool, I don't need to quit my job now. I can start a side gig first. But how do we actually decide what to start? And we could probably spend a whole episode just speaking about validating an idea. But could you share a little bit about that?
Oh, totally. So, one of the biggest things that I advocate to people is to not try and find your passions, not try and follow your passions. I'm doing air quotes right now. Mm-hmm. And that you should instead pursue an area of interest. And I choose that word very carefully because I think passion sort of puts us in this mindset where you have to be 110% into it or you shouldn't even give it a try. And when you take that frame of looking at something, you're going to pass on a lot of opportunities that could potentially turn into something that you might grow a deep interest in the future. And so when I look back at different projects that I've worked on with my own blog, my own side projects, they weren't something that I was immediately passionate about. My first blog post was just sharing raw thoughts, and I wasn't a very good writer at the time. I was building my skills. I was trying to learn what I liked writing about. And so it turned out that I really liked writing in sort of a self-deprecating manner, sharing my biggest failures and biggest lessons. And that experience has taken me on a journey that I've continued to sort of foster that interest. And now I've become very interested in writing. And that interest in writing has opened a lot of doors for me, writing on Forbes and Entrepreneur, different publications. Mm-hmm. And so my advice to people who are looking for what their side business should be related to is to just pick an area of interest. And I'm doing an experiment with this right now. Yeah. As of this date, we're in mid-December here. I'm doing an experiment with this on my blog. And so if you just went to ryrob.com/validate, you can see in real time how I took a random business idea essentially for my audience, and I'm validating it this month. And so it all starts from a place of having an interest in something. I basically gave my audience 3 topics that I'm interested in. One of them is hiking. The other is cooking. And the third was long distance running. And so I had people vote on which topic area I should build a business around. And so now what I'm doing, basically, I'll give you the short version of it. I didn't rush to trying to come up with an idea. You know, I'm actually still not even sure of what my revenue generating model is going to be for this business I'm working on. What I did was I took the winner, which was hiking, and I looked for opportunities that I could weigh in with my interests and some skills of mine. And so I'm really good with building websites, creating content, and blogging. So what I was thinking was that if I could create some sort of unique angle to providing a hiking guide or hiking tips in California, my home state, maybe I could differentiate that content and eventually build an audience with it. And so what I'm doing is I'm now actively building that audience. I haven't actually created a website because that would be essentially a waste of time right now before I really know what people even want. And so I'm going through this process of connecting with my audience. I've built an early feedback group of about 50 people, mostly friends, some acquaintances that I know are interested in hiking, and they live in California. Mm-hmm. And I'm just having conversations with them. I'm asking them what they like about their coolest local hikes, what they use to try and research different hikes to go on, and some of just the pain points that they have related to hiking and finding cool adventures. And I'm in this discovery process of really trying to listen to my audience and build what they ask me to build rather than sort of rush to create what I think they want.
Yeah, like for people who aren't online business nerds like us, it's essentially like the same model that almost everyone uses. It's finding a topic that interests you, growing an audience around that, and then like paying attention to what it is they're asking for, and then creating that thing. And it's like pretty much as simple as that. And yeah, I'm keen to see how the Validate Challenge goes as well.
Yeah,
obviously growing a side gig while you're still fully employed, it does take a bit of time management and focus and productivity. What are some sort of tips you have for making better use of our spare time?
Oh, man. Well, first you have to, you're probably going to have to create time, because most people don't feel like they have tons and tons of time, right? Like our natural tendency is to fill our time with activities. And so basically what I did when I wanted to focus on my side business was I looked at the different utilizations of my time that I could afford to lessen my involvement in. And that's going to be different for everyone. But for me, at the time when I first started doing this, I was single. I was 22. And so a lot of my time went to, going out to bars, doing social events with friends after work, going on trips every weekend. And so I started to take a really hard look at myself, and it really forced myself to ask how serious I was about growing this business, because that really actually meant cutting back on going on trips on weekends and instead spending time working on my business while everyone else was out having fun. And for me, it meant, as I alluded to earlier, I learned that I sucked trying to work on my project after a full day at work. And so that turned into getting up at 4:30 in the morning, which meant sacrificing evening time because I had to go to bed around 9 in order to feel alive at 4:30. And so basically, if you can create that 3 hours a day or whatever your magic number is, if you can get somewhere between 15 to 25 hours per week for your side business, that's the type of time frame that I've found to be most effective for actually getting quick results. And so that's sort of the initial steps of what my students go through in my new course, The Launch Formula. And we identify those different responsibilities. And it is different for everyone because some people have kids, some people have, a husband or a wife, and you don't want to sacrifice that time from the people that mean the most to you. And so you have to find these little pockets of time, wherever they may be, where you're not pissing off the other people in your life, essentially.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, and it's hard to do. That's the thing, is that it does take sacrifice. There's no way around it.
And I'm glad you mentioned at the beginning, like it was a lot easier when you were single, because I know myself, I felt the same thing. And now I'm not just dating a really amazing girl, but she's got a 7-year-old son. So it's not like we can just like worry about how we spend our time, but I've got to focus on 2 other people too. But it's just another challenge.
It changes over time.
Yeah. Something that I wanted to come back to that I meant to mention when we were speaking about validation and testing if something's actually worthwhile pursuing is what happens when we have this idea and we've been, trying to test it out and validate it. And this is something that I'm going to explore in the new year too. But what happens when we are running that thing or we're pursuing that side gig and it gets to a point where we need to determine or decide if it's time to quit and let it go, or if it's just a sticking patch where we have to push through? How do we sort of differentiate between those 2 points?
Man, that's almost impossible to answer on sort of a generic level. But I can think of, looking back at my own side business, at least when I was still working at Creative Live, my last full-time job. I had essentially 2 side businesses. One was freelancing. So I was taking my skills that I was building at work and applying them to freelance clients. I was doing content marketing work. And that's what eventually spun into what is now my main source of income. And I had this other side business at the time, which was my blog. And so I was also working on courses. And for the most part, my courses weren't really working at the time when I was at Creative Live. And so I launched my first course that was related to learning how to write more effective freelance proposals. And it was something that I had built a lot of experience with, just pitching tons and tons of potential clients. And I was learning, what worked, what didn't. And so I packaged my knowledge into a series of video lessons, and some written lectures. And I put together a simple course landing page, and I launched it to about 1,000 of my subscribers at the time who had flagged an interest in freelancing. And only about 10 or 15 people bought the course. And so I did have sort of this moment where I had a major miss on my expectations. I was thinking, maybe 5% of the 1,000 people that I launched the course to would actually buy it. But, it ended up being much, much lower. And so I at the time, I sort of shelved the idea of working on courses. And I didn't actually come back to working on courses for, another 6 months to a year later. And so I did take a break when I felt like that side of my business wasn't working. And looking back on it, I think what has made the difference and what has now made my courses successful this time around has been that I have a much closer connection to my students. And when I went about building my first course on writing freelance proposals, I didn't really build it while talking to any of my potential customers. I sort of created what I thought they would want, and based on what I thought they needed. And it turned out that most people didn't find much value in the topics that I was talking about on that course. And so now, basically, my advice to people going through my course and trying to find the right side business is that they should be talking to their customers at all times. And if something's not sticking, there's a reason it's not sticking. It could be the way you're positioning your value, or it could be that you're solving a problem that doesn't really need to be solved. And so it's hard to evaluate yourself if you're actually on the right track. And that's why with all my students, I'm helping them one-on-one. And so I think if you can find a person who has experience in your niche or is where you would like to be in the future, try and reach out, ask them for advice, try and just get their opinion on where you're at and what you're working on and see what they think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that.
I wouldn't rush to immediately, scrapping your project if no one rushes to buy it, but definitely take a look at yourself and ask for advice from someone who is where you want to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Ryan, there's something that I saw from one of the emails you sent. You said you've had a lot of holy shit moments trying to sustain a profitable business. I'd love to hear what some of those were and some other big mistakes you see people making when trying to launch a side gig.
Oh, man. Well, so I would say, gosh, one of the biggest holy shits was having to move home with my parents. And number 2 on that list was definitely the day that I had 3,000 iStashes, one of my previous products, arrive on my doorstep, and I realized I had no idea how to actually sell them. And so for a little context, my very first business, which I started in college, was built around this product called the iStash. And it was an iPhone lookalike stash device, essentially. If you just Google iStash, you'll find it. And I posted this huge in-depth story about why the business eventually devolved into a fiery inferno. But a lot of it had to do with the fact that I, again, built something that people didn't really need. And I was trying to sell it at a price point that wasn't meeting people on a level playing field in terms of the exchange of value for what I was asking in return. And so that was a huge holy shit moment of when I realized that I had no idea how to sell 3,000 iStashes. And it took me almost 2 years to actually unload all of them.
Jeez. Man. Ryan, anything we haven't mentioned that you think might be valuable for people listening to this and wanting to start a side gig?
Yeah, I would say that the biggest thing that I advise people to do is to not try and follow their passions, right? I already mentioned this earlier, but what I encourage people to do is find their strongest areas of interest, grab some of your strongest skills, and combine them. And then look for areas of opportunity where you can use your skills and your interests to provide value to people. And it doesn't cost anything for you to provide value. You don't have to rush out and build a website, create an app, launch a portfolio site because you want to be freelancing. You don't have to do any of that. All you have to do is connect with the people that you're trying to help and then solve that problem for them. And it helps significantly if it's a problem you've already solved for yourself. And that comes back to sort of the experience and the skills. And I have a free course on my website that teaches people how to identify these opportunities, how to find your interests and discover your skills and pair them together. And you can actually grab that at ryrob.com/find, Find.
Yeah, I'm going to link up all this stuff in the show notes. We've touched on a lot of really good resources. I do want to be mindful of the time, but there's some rapid fire questions I want to ask at the end here. So just the first thing that comes to your mind and in a sentence or two is perfect. The first one is, what do you wish you'd been told early in your 20s?
Oh, man. I would actually say that don't worry is what I needed to be told, especially towards the early part of my 20s, when I was working on Case Escape, when I was moving home with my parents, when I was experiencing a lot of what felt like crippling failures. And looking back at it, I wish that I had someone there who could just say, don't worry, it's all going to work out. Just continue working hard and pushing towards doing things you're interested in.
Yeah, I love that, man. What is the greatest opportunity for quarter lifers today?
Oh, man. Right now, I would say the biggest opportunity is to offer your skills as a contractor. So essentially freelancing. Everyone that I know is building really strong skills. You know, whether you're a developer, a designer, a writer, a marketer. I have tons of talented previous coworkers and friends that are building their skills. They're getting paid to build their skills at their day jobs. And they're now applying their skills to building a side business as a freelancer. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's one of the lightest weight ways to get into your own business.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I have one more question before I get into that. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you and find out more about all the work and projects you've got going on?
Yeah, so I make myself way too accessible. You can email me directly if you want. I'm Ryan at ryrob.com. But if you just go to my website, ryrob.com, I have an insane amount of free content. I'm on a quest to give away as much value as I can. Because, you know, to be totally honest, I'm still learning what my audience wants and needs. Mm-hmm. And I'm just providing value. I'm trying to take every opportunity I can to have conversations. Honestly, I talk with anywhere between 10 and 20 subscribers over email every single day. And so I have this sort of huge Excel doc that I'm building of what my audience's biggest pain points are. And that's sort of informing on the content I create. So if you want to get in touch, if you want to learn more about starting a side business, just shoot me an email. I'm happy to chat.
Yeah, I love that. And you're one of, like we've spoken about it before, you're one of the authentic guys out there online. So yeah, I know that you're not.
Oh, thank you.
If people are going to email you, they're not going to get some random outsourced guy answering back. I've got one more question. Before I get to that, I just want to acknowledge you, Ryan, for coming on today. But more than that, taking the decision to move back in with your parents and realizing that it's what had to be done at the time and basically constructing your comeback. That's essentially what it is. And the sort of position that you are today, and just for sharing so authentically and just being a really cool dude. So thanks for that. The final question that I have is, what one thing can listeners do this week to start creating their own quarter life comeback?
What I would say is you can help someone. Use your skills, your areas of interest to just help people. You're going to get a good feeling out of it, first of all. And the more you repeatedly help people solve problems, the more you're going to push your way into what could be a potential business for yourself. When it comes down to it, everything related to a business needs to come back to providing value and helping people overcome challenges. So my advice to you this week is to find something you care about and help someone else solve that problem too.
I love it. Ryan Robinson, thank you so much for coming on the Quarter Life Comeback.
Thank you.
So there you have it, guys and girls. That wraps up episode 52 of the Quarter Life Comeback podcast. I got to say, this was probably one of my favorites so far. And so much good stuff mentioned by Ryan in this episode. If you like this one and you think your friends could find it valuable, please share it around on social media and shoot me a tweet at Brian Tier and at the Ryan Robinson and let us know what your biggest takeaways were. For me, the biggest thing is definitely that you don't and maybe shouldn't try follow or find your passion, and instead create a side gig by combining your interests and skills in a way where it adds value to people's problems. Now, as always, you can get the links and resources we mentioned in the show at briantier.com/052. And if you like this one and want to get more episodes like it and other stuff I only share with email subscribers, make sure you sign up at quarterlifecomeback.com. Thanks once again for joining me this week, and until next time, keep creating your Quarter Life Comeback.
Thanks for listening to the Quarter Life Comeback. Get started today by visiting briantier.com.